Melvin A.C. Howell traces his obsession with hip-hop street dance as early as 9 years old. His parents couldn't relate to it, nor could anyone in his hometown of Morganton, North Carolina. But when he found himself living out of his car not all that long ago, Howell said he climbed his way out in part through dance.
Part of it is sheer willpower because I knew that there were other people that needed me to succeed that I haven't even met yet. So I was like, I can't just give up, because then what?
I'm Matt Piken, and this is The Overlook, a daily podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. My guest today is Melvin A.C. Howell, a dancer in his 20s, now living in Asheville and about to stage new work through a residency with Trillium Arts in Mars Hill. We'll talk about his instinctive, improvisational approach to movement, how he built self-confidence without feeling support from anyone around him, and how he found refuge in Western North Carolina during and after his bouts of homelessness. Step into the weird, fantastical wonderland of Alice and the White Rabbit through the lens of Asheville Contemporary Dance Theater. It's a family show with colorful sets and costumes in collaboration with the new Studio of Dance. Alice and the White Rabbit opens May 26th and runs 6 performances through June 4th at the Intimate BB Theater in downtown Asheville. For tickets and info, go to the company's website, acdt.org. Melvin Howell brings a raw physicality and expression that street dance companies anywhere would welcome. And since there really isn't a street dance scene at all in Asheville, I began my conversation by asking Howell what he was thinking and expecting when he moved here on New Year's Day of 2019.
I was like, is Asheville going to know what to do with me? Because I'm like pretty out of the box with what I do. And also knowing that there's no one that does what I do, it gave me the opportunity to break ground artistically here, to add more to the culture of Asheville. Because whenever I moved here, I noticed that was one thing that was missing, is there's a lot of cultural pieces missing, especially in Black culture. And I wanted to add that value to Asheville to make Asheville more welcoming to more people and more inclusive.
And again, that would be another point of intimidation for a lot of people. They would say, look, I'm not going to go to a place that I don't see myself. And from the arts, we have a real scarcity here. There are Black visual artists who are thriving here, not so much in dance. Tell me, what did you see that was missing, and how did you think of yourself as disrupting that void?
The first thing that I noticed whenever I moved here was, where are all the Black people at? Because Asheville advertises, like, every now and then, like, Black people on Express newspaper and here and there, but I didn't see anyone. And that made me super curious to really dig deep and get into the community and figure out where everyone is, what's happening in Asheville as a whole and as a community. And then creatively, I just noticed a lack of musical and dance-related culture, where there weren't any hip-hop classes that were like actually hip-hop. I noticed one thing that's huge in dance studios in general is they'll advertise hip-hop, but it comes across, it's actually jazz or like a more modern twist, and they call it like jazz funk. And that really messes with the culture. It ends up getting whitewashed and watered down because it's not the real hip-hop. It's not teaching the culture and the history of where it comes from. And I've always been someone who's very ambitious when it comes to breaking ground and adding value to wherever I move into. So for me, it wasn't super intimidating. It was actually like really exciting to be like, I'm going to be doing something that no one else here is doing.
So you talked about the authenticity of hip hop.
Right.
Where did you learn authentic hip hop movement? Where and how?
I absolutely love that question. I grew up in poverty, so I couldn't afford dance classes like a lot of dancers. So it really started for me as dancing as a way of coping with things. Because in my family, we didn't really talk about emotions or feelings or what's going on in life, especially if you're a kid, you just quote unquote stay in a kid's place. And it got to a point where so much was like being pushed down that I just exploded one day. And I was like, okay, this is not healthy. I can't do this. So I need to figure out something. And I had noticed as a kid around age 9 that I would dance for fun, just messing around, but it made me feel more confident in myself and it made me feel happier. At the time, I didn't really realize what was going on. But as I went through high school, I realized, oh, this is what's happening. Like, this is actually making me a stronger person, making me more emotionally intelligent. It's allowing me to develop a gift that can not only continue to help myself, but help others.
Well, let's back up a second. You're saying when you were dancing yourself at that age, 9 and 10 years old.
Yep.
What were you learning from? Who were you learning from? Were there strong hip hop dance teachers, or were you just learning from elders in street dance? What was the foundation of your dance education?
I was actually just learning from myself. So the biggest part of hip hop and street style dances is it comes from the heart and the soul. It comes from feeling, and it's about telling a story. It's this universal language that allows you to connect with others and bring multiple communities together. So there is obviously tons and tons of technique that's involved once you get more in depth with it. But at the beginning, once you have a few foundations, which is bounce, rock, groove. So these are basic things that we do every single day. We just don't do them intentionally with a rhythm.
Back up a second. You say bounce, rock, groove. You're saying these are things that we do in movement every day, but we don't do it in rhythm. We don't think of it in rhythm. So was this strictly observational on your part, noticing how we move, how your body moves, and then just noticing it in rhythm and then being intentional about that movement in rhythm?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And then you have your musical icons like James Brown and Michael Jackson. These are artists that whether you intended to come across them or not, you're going to. And both of them were known for dancing of sorts. James Brown with his footwork. There's a whole skate style that is named after James Brown because of his footwork. And then Michael Jackson was trained by some other OGs in the street and hip hop dance game. And first, I believe I took some inspiration adding to those observations as I got older, took some inspiration from James Brown's footwork, and that it was more of a fun adding into my particular style because it just felt free and like silly, and there was nothing like super serious about it, which made me feel confident to go for it.
How did you have the wherewithal at that early an age to do something independent, that you weren't doing it in a class? Most kids, whether it's sports, athletics, Cub Scouts, you name youth activities, almost all of them that I can think of are done through peers. They're done in teams, or even if they are individual sports, they learn among other individuals who are also doing it, like tennis, wrestling, whatever it may be. It seems like you were just observing the world around you, whether it was cultural icons like James Brown or Michael Jackson, or just people on the street, and applying it to yourself to create a language that even at that age, you weren't doing among other people. You were doing yourself. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely. I was always a very quiet kid. I said very few words. If you're like sitting at a restaurant and there's like this random baby who just like stares at you with no facial expressions and they're just eyeballing you down, that was me. And it was just because I was just curious. I was always curious about people and about things. And I would challenge myself to create, even like super young, to create random theories about the world we live in that are so like ridiculous that it's most probably not a real thing. But it forced me to think outside of the box and be open-minded to like the possibility of, this is one for sure that I'll never forget. I was like, what if none of us are ever really touching the floor? That's why the bottoms of our shoes get worn down, is because we're like gliding across the top of the ground. And like even signs that are stuck in the ground aren't touching the ground. It's so ridiculous, but it forced me to create different ideas of what would that be like? And like I said, observing other people. Why do they walk like that? Why do they talk like that?
On one hand, every kid at a certain age is strange in their own way as they're just feeling through how to be in the world. Did you have an artistic family? Did your parents have reference points for the kind of child you were and finding a resonance with movement and dance?
Not at all, actually. My mom wanted me to be like this multi-scholarship, go to Harvard, like bookworm, because she's like super intelligent. And then my dad wanted me to be this NBA/NFL all-star. And I was good at it, but I did sports just for him. And because we didn't ever really talk about stuff like deep or emotionally, I always felt misunderstood. And because I was also like a sensitive kid, I was sensitive to words that were used and the tone that they were used in. I always felt super misunderstood. So instead of using words, and it's still to this day, if there was a heated argument or something or a disagreement, the more passionate I felt about that, whether that's because it's a very excitable conversation or very frustrating, my voice closes off and everything gets bottled up. The best way for me to communicate was through body language, and that's how I started creating more with dance.
So always through movement, were there other art forms you experimented with in terms of expression, or did you naturally and very singularly gravitate toward movement and dance?
There were so many. So I was always a fan of singing, but I knew that I didn't have the best voice, so that was just a sing in the shower kind of a thing. But my favorite books were always Dr. Seuss books because they rhymed and they had a rhythm, and that always felt good to me. And so I was like, well, shoot, I know how to rhyme. So I thought I was going to be a rapper. I had like notebooks on top of notebooks of like rhymes. And then one day, this was like 8th grade or so, I had recited one of these raps to one of my friends. And the reaction I got was so nonchalant, I knew that it wasn't good. So I dropped that and then I just switched it more over into poetry because poetry is something that, just like dance and hip hop, is about telling a story and it comes from the heart, soul, emotion. And I still do write to this day, but I would just dance and dance for like hours and hours. And then once I got like 14, couldn't dance at studios because I didn't have the money. But the apartment that we lived in, there were windows in the hallway. Whenever I wanted to train with a reflection, I would go and dance in the windows at night after school. And I would just dance until dinner. I would eat, go back out in the hallway, and I would dance till it's time for bed. And then I would even wake up early, like way early before school. So probably 4 or 5 in the morning, go out in the hallway before the sun gets too high, dance in the window. Then at 14 is also when I auditioned for my first TV show, which was America's Got Talent. Then I kept training super hard, and it got to a point where it was like, okay, I'm going to be like a world famous dancer.
You talked about America's Got Talent.
Uh-huh.
Did you get far into that competition?
I did not. I didn't make it past the auditions. And it was funny because when I went to audition, I had challenged myself, and I've always been a fan of challenges in this way to really test where I'm at. I had choreographed a classical style like jazz routine for my audition, which is not my like specialty style.
Did you have a coach? Did you have anybody who was advising you? Did anybody validate your talent up to this point?
No, not at all. There was absolutely zero validation other than from myself. And around that time, I did get brought into my first ever dance crew. I got recruited, and that was cool and everything.
Wait, you got brought into a dance crew. Where was this dance crew? How did this take shape? What happened?
This was in Bloomfield, New Jersey, because my mom had moved up there. And it just happened because I would dance around the school. And this is at my freshman year. So the kids remember this like freshman kid coming in from like North Carolina who's just like dancing around the halls.
So you got discovered by this crew. And I imagine when you moved to New Jersey, finally you met others who were doing the art form you were doing, or at least in that realm, in that universe. And you must have, for the first time, at least around the way you expressed yourself, you felt community.
Absolutely. I definitely felt community when it comes to dancing. 2008, 2009 is when I was recruited in there, and I was in the crew until about 2016. There were so many other people who not only looked like me and talked like me, but their primary styles were hip hop and street dance and animation and popping. So that was very exciting. Then as I got older, it was like I want to do something so big that it has to be recognized by people all over the world.
Charles Payne has seen what's wrong with public education from three perspectives: as a student, as a teacher, and as a Black American. With the help of the Magnetic Theater's program to cultivate playwrights, Payne has written a new work of art called The Classroom Ain't Enough. It's storytelling, poetry, and original music woven into what the playwright calls a choreo poem. Payne says the overarching message in the narrative is that a child only educated in school is an uneducated child. The Classroom Ain't Enough premieres June 2nd and runs through June 17th at the Magnetic Theater. For tickets, go to themagnetictheater.org. I started the second half of our conversation by asking Howell when and how he developed his own artistic voice, what he wanted to say through his movement, beyond the mere physicality of it.
These are amazing questions. So it wasn't something that gradually happened. It was just something that just happened after one performance. This was in 2018. That was actually the first studio that I taught at whenever I moved up here. And I did the winter show. It was a great show. Like, I had done like some flips and it was very exciting. There was the lights and the crowd and everybody was like, woo. It was like crowd roaring and everything. That was awesome. It was like, oh, they had a good time. They enjoyed the show. Cool. That was validating to a point. But I was like, but I don't feel fulfilled because I didn't really tell my story. I just did stunts and crowd pleasing things to get hype. And I got what I performed for. I was like, maybe there's some people there that I inspired that I don't know about, but I didn't feel like I really touched someone's heart.
Sensing that, how did you then tell yourself, I need to evolve as an artist? And what were the steps you believed you needed to undertake to leave audiences with the impression you wanted to leave them with?
The biggest thing that is missing from a lot of dancers, young and old, that separate them from that threshold of just being great entertainment versus presenting something that really changes somebody internally, is vulnerability. And I preach this all the time. If there is no vulnerability or transparency, if you're not being true to who you are on that stage or on that platform, there's no way that you can reach that person that needs to really see who you are if you're not being that person. So I told myself, never again will I perform just to be exciting. Not only do we have to work years and years to get as good as we do, there's physics and mechanics, and we have to keep up with our own bodies so our bodies don't deteriorate, to make sure that we deliver the best of our craft and culture to others. And so I was like, anytime I perform, I'm going to make sure that I touch somebody's heart.
Did you feel you had to say something specific in your dance to do that? Or was it more just, I need to give myself a platform to come across authentically and people will see that?
It was more so about music selection. I stopped training so frequently to hype and exciting music, and I started moving to music that I felt more. It allowed me to free up so much more mental space to just move and be free and tell whatever story that song pulled out of me. So it wasn't even about planning, oh, this is the story that I'm going to tell, and I'm going to tell it through this song. It's, I'm going to listen to music, and I'm like, oh, that's the song. And there are a lot of shows that I actually just freestyled or improv, as a lot of people know it as, because most times that's when you get the most authentic version. Then, okay, I need to be more vulnerable. So yes, the music played a part, but it was also, if I don't feel challenged enough, if I don't feel nervous enough, then I'm not being vulnerable enough.
Have you had any bigger presentations of your work? You were part of this dance team, the street team. Have you had any bigger presentations of your own dance work to this point?
Absolutely. All of my bigger performances and pieces happened after I left that group. And then I came back to North Carolina. So I would do shows for some studios. But then once I moved to Asheville is when things really took off. And last year I put on a dance production at the Wortham Center called Black Brilliance. And it was a mix of music, dance, and poetry. It was all about vulnerability and transparency. And I felt really good about that because it's a much greater response than I had ever gotten from anything that I had did just to be exciting.
Since deciding you were going to be more vulnerable and authentic, what have you discovered about yourself? What is coming out of you in these performances that you could not have planned to deliver on your own, that you're finding only through performance?
There are so many stories and like childhood traumas and things like that have just been pushed down so deep. And being able to perform these has let me know that I do what I do for me, sure, but I feel like to an extent, I do it more so for the people who might see it, because there's some of these stories are stories that I don't even like rehash to myself. But when it becomes about, there might be somebody, some kid, some teen, some adult, some elderly person out there who's been holding on to something and just needs to know that they're not alone, and they need that validation to be like, everything's going to be okay because that performance just told me that it's going to be okay. It's like being heard.
Are there things you want to do now in your work, now that you've lived in Asheville for a while, that you wouldn't have thought much about beforehand, before moving here? Are there ways of framing your role in this community has that evolved since you've been here?
Absolutely. It's evolved so much. So right before COVID hit, my dance business was actually booming. The dance company is called Heart and Soul Dance Company. I was teaching more, like money was coming in. I was doing residencies. People were more familiar with my name. And then it hit, and then all of that stopped. And I actually ended up homeless. And again, I was 25 at the time, which is crazy because it wasn't my first time being homeless. It was like my third or so.
When you say you were homeless, were you on the street? Or were you just bouncing around different friends' houses without a permanent place of your own?
I was living out of my car. And at the time, I also had a dog. And so it was just like feeding me and her off of $1 McChickens from McDonald's, wherever I could scrape up money from dance.
What kept you from just going home?
At that time, so my parents are separated and I didn't have a home. So since moving out, that was it. There was no place to go back to.
But neither your mom or dad would or could have you while you were...
Right.
Wow. The bout of homelessness you're talking about during COVID that kind of put your company on ice, that was your third bout of homelessness. How did you handle it all? Emotionally, spiritually, physically, how did you handle it all?
It was very tough. I felt very alone and unseen. And there were many nights where it just felt like I was just going to be stuck in this homeless rut, and that I would just cry myself to sleep because it was the only way that I could get exhausted enough to actually rest my body.
How did you get your way out of this last time? You said you felt so alone. How did you find your way out of it?
I would say part of it is sheer willpower, because I knew that there were other people that needed me to succeed that I haven't even met yet. So I was like, I can't just give up, because then what? And I felt like in the times where I felt like giving up, thoughts got very dark, and I was like, this is not conducive to where I want to be and where I see that I can be. So each day I just took it a day at a time and was like, sun's out, like it's going to get better. I'm going to go train dance, and something's got to give. And eventually something did out of the blue. So much stuff just started coming in. Like I got an offer to be one of the dancers in a Sylvanesso music video. And then residencies started pouring in and choreography opportunities, like completely out of the blue. I felt like I had nothing to do with that because I hadn't been in contact with anybody.
Well, how did that come your way? How did people find you?
I have absolutely no idea. I want to say it was just God or what have you. I don't know because I wasn't performing, I wasn't teaching, I wasn't around Asheville. I would drive up to Flat Rock because it's like a little more chill and sleep in my car out there. And that rut lasted like 10 months, and it was just taking it day by day. And dancing, I danced every day.
How did you dance when you didn't even have a place to live? Where were you dancing?
One of the studios I taught at in Flat Rock, or that I teach at still in Flat Rock, is called Art of Dance Studio. And the owner is Kate Collins, super sweet person. Whenever I was homeless, even though there weren't classes going on, or there were very minimal classes going on, like here and there, she would still let me go there and like dance in the mirror and everything. So I would go dance, wash up, do what I needed to do. And
how did money come your way?
That's a great question. I don't even remember. It was so minimal that it was like wherever I could get like $1 here and there. Maybe I was still teaching one class or something at the time, and I'd have a few dollars that would come in each month, but very scarce.
Now, having Flat Rock obviously was vital to your ongoing survival at that point. How did Ray Jeffrey at the Wortham discover you? Was that your first break back into the dance world?
My first break back into the dance world was actually the offer to be a dancer in the Sylvanesso music video. And then from there, I got the offer to teach some dance residencies for Leaf. And then as far as like back into performing, yes, I would say it was at the Wortham. But I believe that first performance was with Stuart Owen Dance Company with Gavin and Vanessa.
So did you feel things were back on track, or were you wary it could all just slip away at any moment? You talked a while ago about how your work to some degree is informed by your trauma. I imagine this is a big part of that having this happen with you. But you also seem very resilient, and you had a forward look always, it seems like, through all this. Were you confident that, okay, now I'm back on track and this isn't going to happen to me again?
Absolutely. So it was like, I absolutely can't go back to that because it just felt terrible. It was like the worst homelessness that I had went through. But it was also like, I made it through that and came out with way more happening than before it happened. But I just need to make sure that I make more of an impact in case it were to happen again.
What do you mean make an impact in case it were to happen again? Like what kind of impact would you make that would circumvent this or would minimize this? What do you mean?
So the impact wouldn't be so much to circumvent that possibility, but to impact more people before that happened again, if it ever happened again. So it was still at that point about like, I have my platform back. It's time I got to keep making change. And out of that actually was born Movement Art Expo, which I have coming up on June 16th and 17th.
Let's talk about that. I was just going to ask you, so Movement Art Expo, you have a residency through Trillium. So what's involved in that residency? What are you able to explore now in a way through your performance that you've never been afforded to or haven't been afforded to, at least up to this point?
It allows me the opportunity to be surrounded by nature and be inspired and re-inspired again. So anytime I feel like I have a creative block with my movement and creative direction, I'll just go outside and just walk around and just be inspired, open-minded, and inspired by whatever's around me. So, for example, my first time doing this was while I was in high school, before I had joined that dance crew in New Jersey. And I was just walking, listening to music. I was walking home from school, actually, and there's this wall, and there was a crack in the wall that shot up from the sidewalk, and then it scattered out as a reverse lightning bolt. And so instead of having regular waves that I would typically do with my hands and arms, I took that as inspiration. And I was like, what if I can make my hand waves look like lightning bolts? And so I took a lot of inspiration from things like that, or like how a living leaf falls from a tree versus how a dead, crunchy leaf falls from a tree.
And you're then translating that into movement?
Exactly.
So what are we going to see on the 16th and 17th? Is it a mix of choreography and freestyle?
It is. It's a mix of choreography and freestyle and choreographed freestyle. So Movement Art Expo was actually birthed from the homelessness because I was like, people drive past homeless people every day and don't think twice about it, or they get stopped at a stoplight and looking off to the side to avoid eye contact. And so Movement Art Expo was meant to be an immersive art gallery, but of living movement, living, breathing movement that puts you in the midst of the lifestyle or the experience of what that person or that concept is. And so the first Movement Art Expo that I ever did was about homelessness. And so it was actually outside. It was done on a parking deck. And it combines music, musicians, dancing, and some form of visual art. And at the time, when you're homeless, you get by with what you have. So each Movement Art Expo has a different concept and it's from a different perspective. So this one is in celebration of Juneteenth. It's about Black culture, Black music, Black dance.
What happens with your artwork from here and what you're going to do with your art? What are you planning?
I'll actually be flying out to Florida because I'm going to be touring with the Royal Caribbean as one of their main stage dancers and acrobats for the next year, actually. And then I'll be back next June of 2024. But it will also open up a lot of different doors for me and give me more resources that I can then pass down to my dance company members. And whenever I get back, I'm currently training those dancers. So by next year, they'll be ready because I'm putting on so many dance productions. I have a notebook full, and it's going to be 1 to 2 big dance productions every single year until that notebook is done.
Wow, that's incredible. Do you think you're going to base this company and yourself in Asheville to do all this, or is that up in the air when you come back from Royal Caribbean?
That is definitely up in the air. I know for sure the first dance production that I'm going to put on will be here in one of the theaters in Asheville. But from there, I'm not sure. I have no clue.
Melvin A.C. Howell's Juneteenth performances through Trillium Arts are June 16th and 17th at the Marshall High Studios in Marshall. Details and tickets are at trilliumartsnc.org. I want to thank Howell for spending time with me as my guest today. Today's conversation happened inside the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which owners Susan and Giles Collard have been so gracious enough to open to me to record my interviews. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes are online by 6 a.m. every weekday wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at podavl.com. And please support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook.